Mary was very savvy politically. Because her family knew Henry Clay and because Abraham Lincoln so admired Henry Clay, Lincoln was immediately drawn into her conversation about Henry Clay back in Lexington, Kentucky. And thought, gosh, I have found a woman who really understands my ambition. And she was vivacious, and she was pretty. And there's every indication that initially, anyway, he was quite smitten with her, quite fascinated by her. They broke off their engagement, however. He was the one who did the breaking off. There was a period in which he did not think that they should marry. And he had to come to terms with that. It caused him grief that he had broken off an engagement with Mary Owens. So let's set the stage here. He lost Anne Rutledge, probably the love of his life, probably. Broke off the relationship with Anne Rutledge, Mary Owens, and then broke off a relationship with Mary Todd. Probably there's a little social pressure going on. Is this guy going to be marriageable, or is he going to be damaged goods? Does that answer your question? It's very complicated, like all good, interesting lives are. Yes, sir?
You had alluded, and I've read in the past, and there's a lot of people saying that she had sympathized with the South during the Civil War. Is there any proof that she did, or is it just because she was from the South?
Just because she was from Lexington, her family did own slaves. The proof would be circumstantial. She actually lost family members who fought for the South, and she grieved their deaths. But any sister would grieve the loss of a brother in the Civil War. I mean, that doesn't mean she's disloyal to the idea of the Union.
During the Civil War, most families lost people on both sides.
Yeah, we lost 626,000 men on both sides. I mean, it's a lot of human carnage. Absolutely. So I think that's more of the press and the perception, and not the reality. I think she tried to stay loyal. Because, look, Henry Clay was what? The great compromiser. She was a fan of Clay's. Henry Clay's last great act, what's the Compromise of 1850? It's to keep the Union together, to keep this sectional crisis from spinning out of control. Henry Clay came to the rescue again and again and again. Well, if you deduce that, Mary Todd admired Henry Clay, and you know that from evidence again and again and again, and it's very safe to say, therefore, she was loyal to Lincoln's very Henry Clay vision of keeping the Union together. Yes, sir?
Well, along those very same lines, as I recall in my readings, Lincoln is very specific about saying that his objective at all costs is to preserve the Union.
Yes.
He'll do it with slaves, he'll do it without slavery, he'll do it in partial slave states, he'll do it in whatever it takes to preserve the Union. So what is the transition here? Is this military or political or spiritual that he transcends into this mindset to say that we're going to abolish slavery at the risk of the Union?
He needed a major victory, and that victory came at Antietam on September 17, 1862. That's when he could start thinking about making the Civil War a transcendent battle for a new interpretation of the Declaration of Independence and of the importance of freedom understood in equality, and the freedom understood in the context of equality. The transition begins to happen, but as late, Allen Guelzo, another great historian, I mentioned several great historians of Lincoln. We've had Allen Guelzo come into the Hauenstein Center and speak. He mentions that Lincoln, as late as December of 1862, we're talking about 2 weeks before the Emancipation Proclamation is going to be have the force of legality, that Lincoln still entertained with somebody he was talking to the idea of compensating the South for the slaves and sending the slaves over Honduras or Liberia. Let's remember, Lincoln was not into the social equality of blacks and whites. He did not see how blacks and whites could really live together. I mean, it's really quite remarkable when you think about it that he wanted to pay off the southern slave owners and then get rid of the blacks, in essence, send them away. The 13th Amendment that he champions is the largest uncompensated transfer of wealth in human history. Human history.
And the Emancipation is to the slaves.
Yeah. Emancipation Proclamation just applies to...
Very specific.
Yes.
What he's doing here and what he's not.
That's right.
So I guess my question is, for all the explanation, if you will, of the Gettysburg Address, there seems to be all these various other motives, if you want to call them.
I'm sorry?
I mean, other motives. I mean,
yes.
it can be religious, if you will, that he's more enlightened now. It's going to be about personal property and who's going to be compensated for it. He's got the advantage at Antietam now, so he's going to push it politically. And as you mentioned earlier, he's got to broaden this thing because it's turned out to be maybe more than they thought it was going to be in terms of death and expense and time. So there's a lot of implications.
Do you have any formal training in history, sir?
Yeah.
You think like an historian. Historians are trained to think of multiple motives, multiple causes, never to be monocausal. And you have just done a wonderful explication of all of the different motives that would go into a document like the Gettysburg Address. And you're absolutely right. Of course there are political motives. Lincoln is a political animal. He's not just this highfalutin statesman. He's also thinking about the Republican Party, the new Republican Party, and making sure it gets ensconced in national politics to further the ideals. This is a man who had very strong ideas of where the country ought to go. And we know that from the Homestead Act, the Morrill Act, we know the Transcontinental Railroad, all the acts that he supported. Why did he do this? Because he had this economic vision of the United States, of what this country would become. I give another speech about Lincoln in which I talk just about the economic vision and say your lives today, the reason you have all the things you have today, Lincoln visualized and was able to push through the kinds of legislation that would make this a continental-wide market